Really glad to be here with all of you. Um, I am the founder and executive producer of a company based in Northwest Philadelphia called PWPvideo, but we do work all over the region and internationally. And I actually want to start by showing you a little bit of the work that we do. So I've actually got two different demo reels that I want to share. One is just will give you an idea of our general work, and then one focuses on virtual event work. So here we go.
Well, gerrymandering at its core, the erodes the whole issue of one man, one woman, one vote.
Why are districts being drawn this way? And so I thought the only way to figure that out is to draw my own map and see.
She was passionate about wanting to make sure the system worked.
You're in this line of work because this is the passion that you have. So I live, breathe, eat, sleep Northwest Victim Services.
My name is Leanne. Yaping Chen was my name in China.
Habitat allowed us to help families remain in place.
And today we're going to welcome Kia and her beautiful family here into their new home. Woo!
Oh my God!
I'm just glad I was able to have a relationship with Habitat, to come into this neighborhood and really care about the people in this neighborhood to make sure that their housing issues were being addressed.
I think the dream of Play on Philly is really the dream of our young people and watching them step into the lives that they deserve.
Sophia has grown as a person in the program. She just learned to love the music, and it became a form of expression for her.
I think what is special about the lands that we have protected is the relationship that the land itself has with the people here.
If my story can change one person's life, just one, then all the struggle I've been through, everything is worth it. I just want people to see that there is a way out. You know, there is a beautiful life on the other side.
So that is my proof that we've handled some video cameras, and here's a little sample of some of the work that we've done on virtual events.
Welcome.
Hello and welcome.
Welcome everyone to PACDC's virtual gala and award ceremony. So, in good news or bad news, I don't plan on showing a ton of video during today's presentation. I want to get through quite a bit of content today, and I want to also make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A, because I think that that's where I think a lot of good stuff happens in that discussion at the end. But yeah, we'll start with some definitions and discuss strategy, best practices, touch on high-level technology, make a nod to COVID safety, and then get to some discussion. So first of all, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with this stuff, but let's talk about what makes virtual events virtual. Obviously, we're entirely online. It could be totally live.
experience. It could be hitting playback entirely. We do a lot of pre-recorded events and a lot of things that are combinations. You could have a presenter in a scenario like this, or they could be with in person with a crew, or they could be on a laptop, and they could be remote or at your headquarters. But a lot of times they do involve producing content and playing that back. And there's a lot of different ways to have audience interaction. So you need to make a lot of decisions around that. Hybrid events are obviously a little bit different. So you're going to have some of your audience is going to be in person and some of them will be online. Another aspect of what can be a hybrid event is that you could have some of your presenters in person or some of them remote. And that's something that we've been seeing more of lately, and also something you don't want to forget about as a strong possibility. I'll bring that up, I think, a few times today. But yeah, these hybrids will still often involve video playback, just like when we were at in-person galas, if anyone remembers that era. And yeah, if you are going to have interaction between your in-person room and your online audience at all, there's a lot of technical hurdles that you want to make sure that you jump through. And particularly if you're going to have like presenters on a screen interacting with presenters on a stage, that can get kind of challenging. Not at all insurmountable, but there can be some challenges to it. So with hybrid, I will say there are some definite things that I have seen that aren't great. And I told you I wasn't going to show a lot of videos, but I do want to show you guys a sad sample that recently occurred for an event where we produced some video. So hold on one second here. I wish I could keep this, here, we'll go full screen. I've tried to keep the organization nameless, but yeah, we produced a video to be played back at an event that was set up as in person, and they last minute decided to make it hybrid. And there's a couple things that they did somewhat right.
It's always such a pleasure to do anything with Esperanto.
We don't need to listen to it. They have multiple camera angles, so there's that. But then there's a lot of things that they did wrong. So for instance, this obviously bums me out quite a bit, but when it came time for the video we produced,
con tanta libertad.
This is what happened.
Katrina, mi esposa llegó a mi vida.
We met on Bumble,
So,
like a dating app.
we're
And we would
listening
talk on the
to
phone, we would text, we
the
would
speakers in
do
the
all
room
those
picked up
things. And then
by a
one day,
microphone in
I was
the
in my
room,
apartment and I was
and we're watching a camera pointed at a screen. That is a major bummer and really not necessary, particularly given the fact that they had, I know they have a third shot of the audience. And good news, there was a good number of people in the room, but there was also another 20 or 30 in their virtual audience, some of whom were important people. So that's, I just wanted to show that as being sort of chock-a-block with things that I would hope that you would avoid doing. Some other things that can happen, I mentioned the pointing the screen. That's obviously, as a video producer, that really bummed me out. The run of show that you're going to create for your in-person event isn't necessarily like taking an event that you used to put on before the pandemic and just saying that'll be our hybrid event and then we'll just add a stream doesn't really cut it. And that goes to that idea of using the single camera from the back for iMag. Like, that doesn't necessarily engage your audience. So you've got to think about the experience for both in the room and remote. So for instance, like if you don't have anyone there to manage the stage, one of the things that happens frequently with that camera at the back of the room or however you're covering it is if no one is there getting that next speaker ready to go on promptly, you end up with a lot of time where the shot's empty while the new speaker comes in, and it's really annoying for everybody at home, particularly now that we're just used to someone just taking over in Zoom and everything being much snappier. Another thing that I think really needs to be thought about if you're truly going to do a hybrid event and you're doing like a fundraiser, if there's going to be a meal, don't place it in the middle of the program. Like, a lot of our traditional events, we start with like a little bit of talking and then we say, please enjoy your dinner and we'll be back in half an hour. But what is everybody at home going to be doing for that time? It's really isolating. and it really makes the home audience feel less than that in-person audience. I really think that's one of the best ways to exclude them. Also, something to think about is hopefully all of our organizations are talking a lot about equity these days. And there can be a lot of different reasons why some of our audience isn't in the room. So think about those equity issues when we start talking about what's going to happen in the room versus what's going to happen remotely. Though there are some strong opportunities, we don't want to really other people. And by the way, just in that run of show, if you want to do that 5 minutes before dinner or the 10 minutes before dinner, and you want to tell people what the agenda is going to be and where the bathrooms are and all that stuff, it's great. You do not need to stream that. No one at home needs to know where the restrooms are at the Hyatt or wherever you are. Another thing that I get asked about a lot, and I really try to push back on, is forcing interaction between people that are in person and remote. That doesn't mean that you can't have like a remote person ask a Q&A to a lecturer. But there's a lot of talk about networking kiosks, like, oh, in the lobby, we'll put up a laptop, or we'll have a booth that'll be quieter where people can go and speak to the people that are at home. That is technically complicated. It's expensive. And, I think it's just, honestly, I think it's a lot of wasted energy and a lot of wasted time. And particularly, you can do a lot of work to encourage networking among the remote attendees. So by letting that remote audience congeal into sort of that hybrid part of the event, you can have breakout rooms. Depending on the platform you choose, there can be a lot of breakouts. And I will be happy to share the slides. Yeah, Maggie, we'll have to make sure that I send you the deck so we can send it out.
Sounds good.
So anyway, I just want to go back to that, encouraging networking amongst the remote people. You're really designing two events simultaneously, and that also, in some ways, is going to mean needing extra staff, because just like you would never understaff your in-person event, you don't want to ignore that hybrid aspect by just throwing a stream out there and going, yay, we're hybrid. Another thing I want to talk about is Zoom fatigue, because I think that we're all feeling it, but there's a reason I think that it's overblown. And a lot of that is, for instance, in this webinar, in this format, hopefully you are all enjoying the fact that I am not seeing any of you. And I think that the being watched really is what is so exhausting. It's just that feeling on the whole time. So again, forcing interactivity that might feed into that Zoom fatigue, but doesn't create true and valuable engagement, is something that I really encourage you to avoid, because it will just up the Zoom fatigue. And another thing to think about for those remote audiences is, and I think I say this more than once, but if you're like, oh, it should be a 45-minute hybrid event, but you're going to be 5 minutes short because you're not going to broadcast your housekeeping, which is lovely, you don't need to come up with 5 more minutes. No one will be mad at you if they get to go, back in their living room 5 minutes earlier. So I definitely encourage all of us to really think through strategy, and we're all professionals. I'm sure we all do a lot of strategizing, but setting your goals, analyzing things like your audience, talking about how you're going to do that within strategy, implementing it, and then making sure we're monitoring results. So, what are you doing? What's your event for? Is it a fundraiser? Are you doing education? Is this just a donor engagement event? Trying to get your volunteers excited? Maybe you do want to do networking. And maybe there's really a combination if you've got a big symposium happening or something like that. So we start looking at all of those together, we can start to think about the elements that the program should include, and the purpose of all of those elements going back to those overall program goals. And then that really will help us decide who needs to be in the program. Building a run of show is always the first step for me on a hybrid or virtual event, just in terms of planning. Are we pre-recording someone? Are they in the room? Are they traveling? Are they out of the state, out of the country? All of that type of aspect. So having decided what the event is, which we'll get to some decision trees about in-person, hybrid, or fully virtual, but that'll help you also decide who's going to be in that. And then we can talk about, from there, once you know who needs to appear, you can talk about that pre-recorded, what you want to put together as a story video. Before the pandemic, we did tons of videos for events because you can condense a tremendous amount of impact and story and emotion in a 3-minute video. And that's hard to do through a speaker in 3 minutes. So, taking advantage of the virtual environment. One of the things that our clients and us have learned over the last few years now, I guess we're getting close to, is that virtual really can be less expensive. When you don't have people hammering your open bar or needing a full chicken dinner, it really, really changes things. It would get to eliminate the aspect of location limits. And I think that, I've seen for a lot of organizations that I work with that might be focused in a region versus just a smaller neighborhood, that they can not only reach out to the broader region, but even get to neighboring regions and neighboring partners. I've had a lot of organizations that were just thrilled that they could, aim to get audience members from all 50 states. And again, if the work you do can draw an international audience, that's another thing to do. Obviously, remember, if you're going to think about tapping into an international audience, time zones can become an issue. It's really tough to pick a time for Australia to work with the East Coast. This is the danger of having my window open. Excuse me one second. Sorry. So, but yeah, besides time zones, a lot of time limits are removed, and I find that that's true both for attendees and presenters. I know a lot of people who attend a lot of events and are just so glad that they can just open up whatever the platform is on their computer at the end of their workday. They don't have to, plan for sitters. They don't have to arrange for all that jazz. They don't even have to necessarily put on a fancy suit. And the same goes for presenters. We'll talk about that some more, but it's just a real boon to be able to get national level speakers. I think I actually talk about this on the next slide, but I guess I don't. But you can get national level speakers and you don't have to fly them in first class. You don't have to put them up at the best hotel in town. You don't have to hire the fancy car to move them around. So hybrid, you can do a lot of things. You're obviously, you really might end up with a different number in your audience, but maybe you can play around with how you want to price that. Obviously you'll have less food and beverage, but if you're still selling tickets to that other portion of your audience, that can work out very well. Again, I don't want to forget about equity, but you really can turn a lot of things in person into a VIP experience. So if you do have a high level honoree, someone that a lot of people are excited to meet, maybe you can have a VIP experience either on location. I've also done VIP experiences that are just a specific breakout room where people that are remote can bring guests and even ask questions. I think in the reel that we saw, we had Terry Gross interviewing Dr. Fauci, and that was for our local WHYY affiliate here. And we did exactly that. We had 1,000 people attend around the country, but after the interview, we actually moved Terry and Dr. Fauci's connections into a 50-person VIP Zoom that had been present the whole time. That had been moderated by another local radio personality, but then we moderated Q&A for people with Terry and Dr. Fauci. So obviously you could do that before your main events, as we've often done with in-person, but now you can also do something like that virtually. Trying to do it in person and virtually at the same time, I'd say, is not going to be a great idea. We've been seeing a lot of high-level guests want to participate in events with regional and local nonprofits, but they definitely don't want to get on an airplane anymore to do it. You know, that takes 2 to 3 days sometimes to travel just to come in and speak, and you can do it in 2 to 3 hours tops. So that's a huge opportunity, and I already mentioned skipping all the costs of plane tickets and hotels. All right, so are we going to go in person or not? So I think that the audience is going to define this quite a bit. You know, if your audience is full of immunocompromised people, do you actually want to even go back into the world when we're still dealing with such large spikes? What's going to serve the goal of what you're trying to do? So, for instance, fully virtual can work really well at eliminating those geographical barriers for speakers and attendees. I don't have video of this, but I do just want to share that last night I was actually really excited. I'd signed up for a webinar presentation from the Sierra Club that was all focused on storytelling. So not only do we do video production, which is obviously storytelling based, but our company also sponsors a story slam for people in the nonprofit field and other mission-driven areas. So I was super excited to hear the Sierra Club's take on using stories. They had, I wasn't sure exactly the attendees. I figured out from some comments that there were like 400, maybe 500 attending from around the country. And they unfortunately didn't really design their program to what they said the content was going to be. There was a lot of talk about, you know, convincing people to join a climate battle versus talking about actual stories. There was badly designed in terms of how they let people chat as opposed to controlling it. So there were some negative comments going on in the chat that weren't being well moderated. And they didn't use their time well, and they didn't use their speakers well. So they weren't managing, like they had an ASL interpreter. That's fantastic. But whoever it was in charge of setting up the Zoom webinar didn't know how to do what's called a multi-pin. So you were either seeing the ASL interpreter, usually when she coughed, or you would see the speaker at that time. But I never saw both. So it was just a hot mess and a waste of time. It was supposed to be a 2-hour workshop, and they put up a 5-minute break at the hour mark, and I bailed because I don't know about you all, but back to wanting my life back, I don't need a 5-minute break on a Zoom. I can take one if I need to. That was a huge waste of time. So I was over it. But anyway, like thinking about those experiences, what the opportunity was is that Sierra Club had a national group where they were able to get hundreds of people to come and get some education. And if they had done it right, I think it could have been a huge boon. And it was a very good reason to be virtual. As we're planning for hybrid or in-person, I do think that it is a best practice right now to have a contingency plan. I'm not sure how things are going exactly in Scranton, but right now in Philadelphia, we've had huge spike in COVID. A lot of my team have been out with exposures, clients, subjects. It's been rough. So this is one of those times where if you have a switch like that you can throw, it might be time to throw it. So this includes, when you're negotiating with your venue for that contract, can you have an out, and what is that out going to be? Is there a specific cutoff date that you need to choose for when you would do that? But you don't want to ask those questions after you've signed a hotel contract. That's just going to get you very stuck. But if you build that run of show, if you were going to do hybrid anyhow, hopefully that run of show should be very easy to port into a fully virtual event. And it is also, like, one of the things that I've seen done with one of my clients, they had planned for in-person at a hotel. They switched to virtual, but instead of it being like all of the presenters were dispersed, we brought all the presenters and we used a smaller room at the hotel, set everything up, and that was our shoot location that we streamed from, but no one was there for an audience. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we go either fully virtual or hybrid. And there's a lot of talk about like the elements that happen in the room and if those should happen virtually. So, there are a lot of things that we do in person that just don't go well. They don't all convert one-to-one. I think we've all probably been in some events over the last couple of years where people really shouldn't have had, like, made an attempt to convert things. It kind of goes to that networking kiosk idea. Like, you know, that's just not going to work. But also, like, for that hybrid attending events, hybrid audience in the event, are there things that you can just skip for their experience that really doesn't serve the goal for that portion of your audience, but you can, you know, enhance the experience of being in the room? You know, if you're going to do it, definitely think about how technology is a big deal. If you're going to have, I mentioned this, it'll keep coming up, but if you're going to be talking to remote people, you have to make sure it's so easy to get feedback if you don't know what you're doing. And so make sure you've got that team with you that knows how to handle it. And I just want to say, after a couple of years of watching people take dinner events to the virtual world, I hope we're all over the logistical nightmare and expense of feeling that we have to send a box of food. People, I think, probably won't be making their own dinner at this point. So when you start designing your show, and I think this goes for an in-person event or a remote event, you know, you always want to capture attention, keep getting it bigger, have a full arc to the story of the evening, in person or remotely. And, you know, that means it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end. And that will really help to drive that action. You know, the technology is really, really easy to get lost in. And it changes. Later on, we'll talk about some of the platforms that you can use for hybrid events. I don't know all of the platforms. There's a new one every couple of months. So I like to talk about, you know, working to your strengths, but hiring to your weaknesses. And this isn't just, I hire some people with certain platforms because it can be very deep in terms of what you need to know. So yeah, it's a really easy place to get lost and to feel like you have to bootstrap everything. And if you're, you know, if you're adding a revenue stream with the hybrid aspect, or you're doing a fully virtual event, which is going to have a lower cost, hopefully you have some budget freed up to do that. But as long as you are the person managing those goals and managing that audience and those expectations and always managing your message, the technology is just going to help you get it there. So, you know, knowing your audience, I mean, that's crucial in every aspect of everything we do as a nonprofit. I don't need to spend a lot of time talking about that. But yeah, if you run everything back through your goals, it makes it really easy to eliminate things from that run of show that aren't going to deliver the results you're after. But in terms of figuring out those results, like, it really does matter to have KPIs, to have your key performance indicators ready. So is it a fundraising goal? You know if you're going fully virtual, you're probably not going to break your gross records. But I've been seeing over the last couple of years a lot of our clients really crushing net fundraising records, which is just lovely that that's been possible in this really difficult time period. But another thing that I want to talk about, I think a lot of people, when there's any type of hybrid or virtual aspect, really get obsessed with how many people are logged in. I remember I worked for a think tank based in this region, but they did a big event down in DC, and they had some really high-end speakers. So we went, and they had us do a virtual, it was hybrid. So we were streaming it out live. We had multiple cameras. It was a big crew. It was a big budget. And I think when we got to the day, there was like 10 or 20 people tops that were logging in. And I was really concerned that the client was going to be very disappointed. They were in charge of building their own audience. They were over the moon because they had one, I think it was a 2 or 3 star general. I can't remember exactly. It was a very important general within the Pentagon watched the entire program. They didn't care about anything else. That was all that mattered. And, you know, if you've got that right person that can attend your event because you've offered a hybrid aspect, who is someone that's important to keep engaged because they're one of your big fundraisers or donors or big advocates for you, then, you know, that makes it all worth it. But in terms of the viewers that you do get, average watch time is really, really a good indicator to look at. So, you know, if people are really logging in at the start and they're gone after 10 minutes, that tells you quite a bit. And another thing in terms of results is to make sure that all of your follow-ups for your virtual attendees, just like you would for your in-person attendees, are totally ready to go. And you'd want to have those lists segmented so that you're doing different follow-up for those that came in person than for people that participated in a hybrid or virtual event. So yeah, so if you're thinking about that experience at home, we like to think about it as a TV show telling your story, and that results in people understanding the need and that you are offering a solution to that need, and that we're really trying to get people activated to take an action at the end of that night. I think that every event that I've been to, whether it's educational, fundraising, or donor or volunteer engagement, there's always some action that hopefully we're doing at the end of those events. And a big thing is, like, I really like, for particularly anything in a hybrid or virtual world, it should be blissfully short, because otherwise we all spend a lot of time looking at our watch. Oh, I silenced everything but this. So, sorry about that. So let's just not extend those run times just because we feel that, people are used to our event lasting an hour. As far as being ready, like, definitely be ready for difficult things to happen. So, how quickly can you make that switch from a hybrid plan to a fully virtual plan if we end up with strange things afoot? Technology-wise, and I'm happy to answer questions about specifics, but in the streaming world, like, if you've got a ton of stuff there and you only have, one laptop with one little adapter that's supposed to get a whole room full of tech out to the world and there's no backup, that makes me nervous, particularly if you're going to have a large audience. And then as you're thinking about that show, will it work both in the room and at home? I think that applies really strongly to live auctions and fund a need type of stuff. I've done I really hadn't been involved in physical event planning. So with virtual events, we've been doing a lot of live auctions, and which often involve those fund a need moments. And I think they work well if they're fully virtual. You just have to make sure, if you're going to do something like that where you're going to stream it, that you have the right platform that can work for both remote and in the room attendees to participate. So breakout rooms are another common ask or common idea. And I think it's just you really want to think through that goal setting about what a breakout room is going to add. Depending on the platform that you're using, it can be very easy to do breakout rooms, and then they can bring a lot of value. But sometimes it's just like that need to do that one-for-one, like, let's have some networking. If you do deploy breakouts, you definitely want to make sure that each room is in some way either moderated or at least monitored. Putting 6 to 10 strangers into a breakout room with no one to start the conversation can end up being very awkward. It is not hard to get a group of introverts in a single breakout room. So it's really nice to have someone from your organization. It doesn't have to be staff. It can be, a board member. It can be an active, engaged volunteer. But you really want to plan for how you'll handle interaction. And that interaction is not just in breakouts, but it's also in the room itself. So how are you going to handle Q&A? Are you going to have chat on or disabled? Are people only able to chat with the hosts and panelists, or are they able to chat with everybody? And if you're going to let people ask questions to a hybrid event, and you're going to bring them up, on a screen, the audio can be a really big hurdle to watch for, because feedback is easy to get if you don't know what you're doing, and is very unpleasant for everybody. So definitely plan for how you're going to moderate chats and Q&A, even if you're not bringing remote attendees into the room. A really common and solid way to do that is to have a designated person, sometimes on stage with a laptop and a microphone, sometimes off stage with a laptop and a microphone, but letting someone be the voice of your remote audience can be an excellent way to handle it, because they can help make sure the conversation's going well digitally and engage them in the room. Another thing I think that people often forget about is some level of tech support. and how you would offer that, how you would support it. Some of the platforms provide some tech support for the big expensive platforms, but you want to make sure that that information is present, and that if you're going to do things like, I know a lot of times for virtual events, even if we have an older audience, we'll make sure that we have a phone line available. With so many things happening on Zoom, luckily all of our grandparents now know at least how to log into a Zoom. Whether or not they get confused by webinar, that's possible. So it's nice to have a different way, and knowing your audience is a big way to decide how you'd want to offer tech support. So some general thoughts about communication. I think it's really, really valuable for the hybrid and remote audience to make sure that they know what time the program starts, and not just that looping slideshow. People who want to log in early will always log in early, but I think a lot of people get bummed if there's that hold slideshow playing for too long when they first log in. I also think that you will do much better in terms of attracting audience to buy tickets and sign up if you tell them what time the program will end. I don't know about all of you, but I have personally not, like, I did sign up for that Sierra Club event last night because they told me it was a 2-hour event. I could actually plan when I was going to eat dinner, as opposed to just saying it starts at 6 and then wondering, like, how long am I there? Can I be with the family at 7, 8? What's going on? So I think it's just a huge kindness to do. And if you haven't, timed everything out, but you're doing a hold the date, I think it's worth predicting what that time is, and predict a few minutes long. Again, if you say it's an hour and you end at 50 minutes, you're not going to receive complaints. If you say it's an hour and you go 90, that is not good. So here, I often am asked, like, when should we send the links out? I'll put this up. A lot of this is related to something that luckily has mostly gone away, but the whole world of Zoom bombing. I think there's a lot less Zoom bombing, partially because everybody has wised up and isn't just publicly posting links all over Facebook and Twitter. But no matter what, I do recommend not sending out the actual event link more than 24 hours ahead. That's just a way to make sure that you're controlling that your actual invited audience is going to attend, and that you don't have to sweat it. And, because your audience members can post that link to be like, oh, I can't wait for Sierra Club's thing tomorrow, and you get some real random people in, and it's not always great. So 24 hours, then I like to have an email go out the morning of. I think lunch is the time that people check their email, and then you want to make sure that link is fresh and ready for them as you get close to event. So I often recommend 1 hour before, and then like 5 minutes before start time. You can skip one of these on the day of, but I definitely feel like it's useful to remind people a day before, and then a few times during the day, and either 1 hour or 5 minutes ahead of event start, so they don't have to go digging through calendar and digging through all the places that they would look for that event link. So, technology. There's a bunch of large event platforms. I know that that Maggie and the foundation here like to use Wova. Cvent is an 800-pound gorilla that does a lot of platforms. They started with in-person events, and then they've added a lot of stuff for virtual that's very powerful. Hopin is extremely powerful, like very, very, very popular in terms of it being accessible. I know that you can hire consultants to help you design a Hopin, but it does not have to be as expensive as Cvent. And Wova also is not as expensive as Cvent. Cvent's just expensive. Zoom Events is a large event platform now, but it is not as expensive as the rest of these. And it's really cool because it kind of is combining webinar and meeting so that you can have sessions like this, but you can also have smaller sessions that are more like breakouts, but they're in individual Zoom meetings, and you can put it all together into that platform. So it's has some strong advantages. It's newer. It was just released a few months ago, so still getting used to it. And there are a lot of platforms. Wait, if you don't like this list, wait a month or two and someone will launch a new company. Yes, I will be a little more specific about powerful. I think when I go through some of these pluses and minuses for us. So these large event platforms can handle everything for you. And by that, it's, I mean, your registration for in-person and hybrid. It can, like, I know that CVent and I think WOVA, like, they'll help you design a virtual venue so that you can get your vendors to be able to interact with people who are remote. It also helps you set up and do maps for your vendors in the venue. They will help you with emails. They'll, you know, we've all gone to those conferences where there's an app. They will put out that app so that you can schedule one-on-ones or meetings with vendors. You can see the business cards of other people, all that kind of stuff. That's the that's the powerful that I mean of these giant platforms. And they're all going to have slightly different feature sets. But they do, because they can handle everything, sometimes you will need a consultant to help you. That consultant could be from the, you can get an outside consultant or you can get consultation and support from the platform itself. CVent's so expensive, I think it comes with a lot more support. But these platforms, if they were designed originally for in-person, they're all caught up and designing for hybrid. And a lot of them are launched for virtual. And of course, they're now adding a lot of functionality for hybrid. And I mentioned that virtual venue idea. That's where there's like a map, and you can, some of these platforms will put up like virtual tables. And so if you're in a webinar, you might be at a virtual table and you'd be like, who's here? And you can see little pop-ups, little profiles around the table, and you can exchange information and chat and get something that's a little more akin to being present at a conference as far as networking and stuff like that. And having a platform like this, if you are, if you're putting on a symposium that really does rely on exhibitors or sponsors, these platforms really bring a lot to the table to give a lot of value to them. And I just mentioned some of the networking aspects. All of the platforms have slightly different versions of it, so you'd want to figure out what's right for you, depending on if you're doing a conference or just a fundraiser. The big ones that do absolutely everything can be expensive and complicated. And you do want to make sure, I think this is really important, that whatever you choose, that it's going to play well with your CRM. It's lovely that it can handle everything, it can do all the registration, but like, can you get that data out of there? Or can you, you know, if you're on Constant Contact or, you know, whatever it is that you're using, like, can you email, collect your data and aggregate it, or are you really just siloing everything inside of CVent? So I think some of those, you know, a lot of the Blackbaud software, you know, has event platforms, things like that. So there are plenty that work around and make sure that you get your donor management system to stay up to date. I want to talk a little bit about some of the common stuff we use for virtual events or smaller events that aren't giant conferences requiring the giant platforms. So I think, you know, with Zoom, there's a lot of pluses. Everybody, you know, good for Zoom. It is the Kleenex of what we're doing today, right? You can choose between the meeting or webinar style. You can have breakout rooms, and it is really, really inexpensive. Minuses, I mean, if you're just get a normal Zoom account, you're going to end up with standard definition video if you don't pay for a little upgrade. Not that expensive. I will say that I know a lot of people really do like to use the meeting versus webinar like this. I think there are benefits to being in meeting, but if you're depending on the event that you're doing, there is just a lot of wandering eyes. I mean, I've seen a lot of galas. I've visited some online galas where it's like, oh, what is, you know, let's scroll through the 100 attendees and see what everyone's living room looks like. You know, who's got a cat? It's fun, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're absorbing the information that's being presented to us. Zoom can be, I think we've all gotten to know it a lot better, but I don't know about your experience. They have lots of settings, and it's in lots of places. And just when you know where exactly everything is, they move them. So you do need some expertise to run a Zoom event properly. And just for whatever you're doing, don't ignore having the right number of team members to help you run an event. Trying to, particularly if you're going to be presenting at it, trying to be a one-person show is really tough. And I mentioned Zoom bombing, as it is a minus that can exist, but it's really thank goodness that's gone away. So Facebook Live and YouTube Live can be a really good deal. Again, I think everyone knows how to use it, and you can attract a lot of the public. I think one of the cool things is, for organizations that I work with, I don't know a ton of organizations that have massive followings on YouTube. There are some that have built that audience, which is always impressive. But I do have a lot of clients where they've got, the magic 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 250,000 followers on Facebook. And there is some real power to hitting that live button on Facebook and telling tens of thousands of people that you're broadcasting. So even if they're not on your email list, they might actually still attend that event. Those are free platforms, which, again, depending on the type of event and your goal, can be very, very attractive. There are some minuses, though. And back to the free thing, there is no tech support. And that can be a real problem, particularly if it is the only platform that you're using. I'll talk in a minute about multi-streaming, but anything goes wrong, there's no one to call. It's really hard to recover. A lot of times people create videos. If you're a nonprofit that plays back other organizations' videos, if there's one copywritten song in there, if you're on, I know YouTube Live in particular, and I think Facebook now also, they're really strong with bots that scrape for copywritten content, and they will just shut your stream down. They'll often even sort of lock up your account so that you won't be able to stream again until you've kind of sorted it out with them. So, and that can be true whether or not you've gotten permission from the artist to use that piece of material. So the only times that I've used Facebook and YouTube Live, I've either made absolutely sure that I'm not using copyright material. Actually, Facebook, if you do some searching, they provide some stock music that is specifically cleared for Facebook Live, and I've often used that. But yeah, you want to make certain that you're not going to end up stuck in that rabbit hole. But yeah, back to you can attract a lot of the public. That can be great, but you can also really be dealing with moderating some real negativity. So just be aware of it and be ready to handle that. Another platform that's gotten pretty popular, I'm not sure if you've all heard of it. If you haven't, do check out StreamYard.com. It's very inexpensive. It's actually quite easy to use. It's a WYSIWYG. It's a what you see is what you get kind of a platform. So it's just an online-based streaming platform that lets you connect multiple people like Zoom, but you can actually switch between them and control the experience. And you can stream that out to Facebook and YouTube. It also is the back end for Hopin. So you can feed a Hopin site using StreamYard, which will make the production hopefully less expensive. It's funny, I didn't mention it here. One of the things that StreamYard does, you can actually add graphics, like lower thirds, logos, things of that nature. Not sure how that fell off my list. So there are some of the minuses is that to date, I don't think StreamYard, and of course these companies keep changing things, but last I checked, they only stream to YouTube and Facebook, or if you guys are big on Twitch, you can use it for that. But not Zoom, which is a bit of a bummer. So there's that. Easy as it is, you still need to make sure to spend some time to get through the learning curve. The customization that I talked about with lower thirds and stuff like that, there's some limits. You can use web colors, but you can't necessarily upload a custom lower third that you've built. You have to build it within StreamYard. So some other platforms, GoToMeeting and WebEx and those types. I like to think that there are no pluses to them because they are really, really, really old. And I think they look like junk. And they really are for sales presentations, and boy, do they feel like it. I also don't have a lot of love for Microsoft in general. I don't think there is any work task that Microsoft hasn't figured out how to make a little clunkier. And Teams to me is the Bing of Zoom. It's just not as flexible. I I know they've been updating some things, but again, they don't always change. They fix one thing and break another for us. But I can, with Zoom, I can plug in all of my professional software and do anything that I need to do. And with Microsoft Teams, there's been some real challenges with that. Now, I also know that Microsoft Teams frequently makes itself available to a lot of our organizations through TechSoup and platforms like that. So it's a personal thing, but it has some disadvantages for events. So there is one thing that I did learn about, one of my professional pieces of software that I'll mention in a minute called vMix. If you connect a bunch of people through Microsoft Teams into vMix, you can actually choose each one as a separate source. That's for those of us that are really geeky with this stuff, but it's a cool aspect. And yeah, it really only matters probably, I'm going to guess, to me. So some of these professional things I'm talking about, we tend to use this software platform called vMix. It's actually, for a professional software platform, it's not that expensive. I think there are $500 versions. We use one that's like $1,000 to $2,000. There's different scales of it. Another good piece of software is called Wirecast. It's a little bit less expensive. Primarily run, I think they might have come out with a PC version. I think it was Mac only for a long time. It's not, vMix I would equate to Photoshop. You can do anything. You just have to take the time to learn how to do it. Wirecast is more like, StreamYard or Photoshop Lite elements. You can do anything, but it's not quite as professional. There's also a cool piece of software called OBS, or it's Open Broadcaster software. A lot of gamers use it, but it does everything that vMix will do, but it is open source and therefore free, and also therefore really, really complicated. And then you can also use some integrated hardware systems. I think Polycom is done. I know that a lot of Polycom units, like wired conference rooms, if you've had an integrated facility, a lot of those you can stream into Zoom or other platforms. So you don't necessarily have to abandon that fully integrated conference room that you spent tens of thousands of dollars on before the pandemic. So these things give you tremendous control and the best possible quality when you're doing a virtual event. You can have live people and switch them. You can have remote people connect. You can put any graphic in that you want. You can mix it with in-person presenters. It's just whatever it is that you want to do. But the learning curves, particularly like on vMix and OBS, are just massive. I equate it to Photoshop, or I know how to do video editing in Adobe Premiere, but anytime one of my animators opens up After Effects, my head explodes. It's like so very different. Except for OBS, the software does come with a bit of a price tag, and you probably will want to use Professional Crew. And if you're going to use professional software like that, it really gives you the option to use professional cameras. That's one of the big advantages to it. So if you don't have some of that stuff in-house, professionals come with a cost. Some things that you can do for your event, you can do custom streaming pages. If you're using professional software, a lot of times we'll stream to a custom page on a client's website. So Habitat for Humanity, one of the affiliates recently, we streamed directly to their Donate Now page. It was really effective and worked great. Make sure that the system you're using will, depending on the system you use, you can figure out how much of your registrant data you can capture. A lot of times, depending on the platform, we might know, you can put up a password on a website and find out who logs in. You may not necessarily know when they log out. You can add chat applications onto, you can embed those in a custom web page if you want. You can make sure everything works with your donation software. I think we mentioned auction software earlier, which sometimes comes from your same company, sometimes separately. And then here I'm mentioning multi-streaming again. So that's multi-streaming is, I think a lot of you might be familiar even on Zoom, that you can hit a magic button and send your Zoom feed live to YouTube Live. My question that I want everyone to run through their strategy is multi-streaming can be great, but you've got more channels to moderate and you can dilute your audience. So the way that I like to think about multi-streaming is back to that group that has a lot of people on Facebook. send your emails, sell your tickets, get the thing going. But on the night of, send the stream out to Facebook Live and let everyone know that it's happening. And there's a wonderful chance that you're going to pick up, hundreds, if not thousands of extra viewers and potentially more engagement. But make sure you've got the staff to moderate that chat. All right, I want to talk just a little bit. I want to nod to COVID safety. Hopefully we are all doing all of these things still, but we are still using the least amount of crew that we can. When we're interviewing people, we're still using long lenses, trying to keep everybody safe. We're checking with all of our crew and subjects about vaccination status. We're also asking people if anyone has extra precautions, and we're definitely giving everybody the final say in terms of what they're comfortable with. We're still conducting a lot of outdoor interviews. I've even pointed lenses through windows into someone's home to get B-roll. So, we're still being creative to keep everybody comfortable. And it's really a good idea, I think, for, this is something very common in the video production realm, is to have a COVID safety officer for every job. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily their only job, but to have a member of the team who's in charge of saying like, hey, you're not 6 feet apart anymore, or you need to put your mask back on because you're going inside of someone's house. I think having someone in charge of COVID safety on your team for your in-person events is just as valid and viable and important. So I've been talking really fast because there hasn't been as many questions necessarily so far, and I will tell you that I planned on going for about another 20 or so minutes, but we've made it through. I really did want to get through some of this content because I know there's going to be a lot of very specific questions, probably around technology. I'm also would love to hear from people who are watching about some of the horror, like I went on about that event with the camera pointed at the screen for hybrid, which made me so sad. Or I talked about my Sierra Club event, and I love the Sierra Club, I just hated the event. But what are some horror stories that you all have experienced that if you can share those, raise your hand and we'll bring you up. But that I think would be very helpful in terms of helping all of us talk about things not to do. I will say I'll leave this contact information up for another minute. I'm very happy to receive emails and calls if I might suggest to some questions if they get insanely specific to just your technology, your situation, that we follow up after. So I'm always happy to receive a call or an email. So with that, I would love to take some questions or hear some horror stories.
Thanks so much, Michael. As we mentioned earlier, feel free to add your questions into the Q&A, into the chat, or if you'd like to speak, come on screen, then you can use the raise hand option.
So while we are waiting for this, one of the things that I have alluded to, but I want to talk about a little more specifically, is this idea of preparing to not have feedback in the room. So we just did an event a couple weeks ago where we had a remote guest, but we had a interviewer talking to that guest on stage in a venue. So that meant that we needed, for the local attendees, we needed sound reinforcement. So to hear the person on stage, we had a screen, and we also needed to hear the person who was remote. So and now you're sending audio all over the place, and you have to make sure that that the speaker amplifying the remote person doesn't necessarily get picked up by the microphone, because it can be uncomfortable for the remote person because I'll often hear their voice coming back. So even if you know what you're doing, that can still be particularly challenging, and you very likely will need a live audio professional who can mute and unmute people as you're going to help reduce the opportunity for people to hear themselves doubled up and stuff like that. So we have a question from Pat Wills. I want to try to make online presentations, events, trainings less PowerPoint focused. So what are some apps or programs you can get to make them more streamlined or part of the video feed. So, okay. And by the way, as we sit here, as I just was very PowerPoint focused, but I oftentimes can do the opposite mistake with what I do for a living and show way too much video. I actually showed less video in this class, which I think is how I ended up a little ahead of schedule. So that OBS software, because it's open source and online, there are a lot of nice YouTube tutorials on how to use it, but you can create what's called a virtual camera. You can knock PowerPoint all you want. It's terrible. It's Microsoft, remember? Anyway, just kidding. PowerPoint's good. So OBS would allow you to play back any video that you want, any video content or graphic content that you want to, as a virtual camera. So what that means is I could switch between the camera that you're looking, my webcam, and that virtual camera, and instead of having to do a screen share, you can actually put the video right into that window. So, you know, the Michael Schweisheimer window becomes my playback window. I will tell you all that I also, somewhere in the last year, discovered that within Zoom, the way that I was sharing videos today, that is significantly, I think significantly more graceful and looks better for the viewer experience. And you guys can't share screen right now, but if you go to share screen, you'll get a bunch of options, but it'll say basic, advanced, and files at the top. And one of the things you can do is if you go to advanced, you can actually share a video file, and then you navigate through an Explorer or Finder window and directly play back a video file. So the couple of files that I had ready for today, I had them numbered and in a specific folder ready to go so that I could just play those back directly. So it's something to play with. You just go to New Share and then hit Advanced. And when you're ready to go back to your PowerPoint, you hit New Share again and you go back to Basic and you can choose your PowerPoint screen. Hopefully that will be useful. But yeah, OBS is the great way to do it for free. Wirecast is the easy middle software, much easier to use, does the same thing with a virtual camera. And vMix is, that would be like bringing a sledgehammer to put in a nail, but it'll do the same thing. All right, so Natalie here is asking about, I mentioned multiple camera angles and how many are recommended for an event that would typically host 200 to 300 people in attendance, but now many may be remote. So, and I see there is a separate question. I'm going to do this one first. I think that, okay, so it is, I'm not saying that it is not possible to use a single camera, particularly if you are going to have other sources, then it actually gets a lot easier to use a single camera. I probably should have addressed this, but let's just say if you were going to do an event where all of your audience were remote and you might have a single camera at a venue pointed, and venue could be loose like a conference room, but pointed at, let's say, a podium, and you were going to have an MC. If you design your run of shows so that you go from like MC to a short video or even just a graphic while you trade someone out and put someone new at the podium, back to podium, guest speaker, keynote presentation, what have you, back to graphic or video, back to podium for your MC. Like you can you can plan your show to reduce the number of cameras that you need. Now, if you're in a hybrid event and you do have an audience, I think you'd start to get into questions. Like I like having 3 cameras available, so you could have like a wide shot of your stage, depending on how much stuff is going on stage. But it, you know, gives you something to cut to, let's say, when those speaker changes are happening, hopefully blissfully quick. But you can also have a camera pointed back at your audience. If you're dealing with somewhere where you're going to have a keynote lecture and you're going to allow audience to participate in Q&A, it's very nice to have that camera pointing back at that audience so that you can see them. And there are different approaches to that. One is to do everyone with a question has to get up and come to a microphone that's in a place where you know you can film them. Sometimes I'll have 2 cameras pointing back towards an audience so that I can cover, you know, a couple hundred people you should be able to cover and find where they are if you're going to run a mic. You know, whoever Donahue's the mic, you ask people to stand up so that you can shoot over the tables and find them. And another thing you can do when you get into that 3 cameras is one pointing at podium, or sometimes you'll have that wide and that close at podium. But one or both of those side cameras during presentations can also pan. If you bring them a little forward of stage, they can pan and get you a nice side angle. So it gives you a lot of choices for your technical director to choose from and really amp up the experience. So, and with the back of the room stuff, it is very common in terms of saving some budget that I will have a wide camera locked off and then an operator who's there next to both cameras who can do any chasing if you've got a speaker who likes to wander, or reframing at the podium for tall people versus short people. But they don't necessarily have to adjust that wide shot. But sometimes in your run a show, if there's a choir at this moment and then there's a group of 3 on stage at this moment, that one person can adjust that wide shot while the technical director's on the close-up. So that's a lot of information on how that works. But I would say if you got 200 to 300 people in the room and there's audience participation, 3 cameras is just kind of a nice baseline, but 2 if you're really only worried about showing the stage. And your separate issue, is it typical to offer separate ticket price for in-person versus virtual attendees since they don't get food and beverages? I think so there's a lot of stuff that I would say about this. First of all, I've been working with nonprofits for, I think we're about 20 years, but I'm a filmmaker, not a fundraiser, so I'm fundraising adjacent, is what I like to say. But I do have this I've had this opinion for a long time. I used to joke around before this pandemic that I wish there was an option with galas sometimes to pay $150 to attend, and I would pay $250 if I could stay home. That was a joke that I always sort of meant because I don't always want to have to go out. I don't know. I think it depends on your goal and your audience. If it is a fundraiser, I think that whatever your ticket price is, people are probably buying that ticket to support your organization and not to get the chicken dinner, right? So I don't know that it is necessary within a fundraising capacity. I think that to an equity issue, I think a lot of times, I think it can be great to offer, say, anyone who is a client of your organization, they can attend the hybrid for free. I think that's a great way to increase the accessibility of your event. So it's really there's not a single answer on that one. And in terms of whether or not you're going to offer a lower ticket price for people who are attending remotely, I think that probably might make more sense for a conference type of a scenario. Like if someone just wants to attend a few sessions, maybe they can pay less. And I know a lot of you do also staged ticket prices. Not everyone's going to buy a $1,000 ticket, but I think you have donors who can't attend in person because they're immunocompromised, but still want to buy that $1,000 ticket. So I wouldn't by any means give them an easy out and say that if you want to attend virtually, it will automatically be less expensive. Please don't leave that money on the table. Hopefully that is enough ranting on that issue. Do I have recommendations on cameras to use for hybrid events? No. Okay, hold on. Not necessarily web cameras. Again, everything needs to scale to your budget. And a lot of how I have to work with clients is scaling to available budget. So if you're going to hire people, I didn't put anything in the presentation about this, but if you're going to create an RFP to hire a production company that's going to help you with all the software and all the gear and all the stuff, I strongly encourage everybody to think about your event budget and a budget range that makes sense for the return on investment for that event to work with your company with. Because, when you go to that, how many cameras do you want? Well, if my budget's unlimited, I'm still probably not bringing more than 4 or 5 cameras, depending on how much performance I'm covering or whatnot. But if my budget's very limited, I might say let's design a run of show where we can use 1 camera. So I would say that that's a big deal. If you're in a massive room and your camera is going to be, very far away, that's going to impact your camera choice because you're going to need a very long lens. So, a lot of virtual events that we do, we can get away with less expensive camcorders, but sometimes we have to bust out a 600 millimeter lens, and that works on our bigger cameras and blah, blah, blah. So no, I don't have anything specific for general, but as you think about your specific event, and this would be a time that you're welcome to reach out to me with specific questions based on what exactly is happening. And then it looks like Maggie shared some of those screen share options. And does no one have a horror story, honestly, of a terrible event you've attended? I only brought up 2. I know I could think of more. I'm sure you guys have been to something that just you couldn't believe you were sitting through it. Nobody?
Michael, the one issue that I have seen often is not having a proper microphone set up, and then relying on a laptop or some inferior microphone to pick up the sound from the room.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes to that event that I showed where when they played the video, they were picking up the audio from a speaker in the room. So work with, if you're doing an in-person event that will have a hybrid element, you've got choices. You could work with, if you're at a hotel or venue that provides AV support, professional AV people these days, a lot of them can help you with streaming. Hotel-based AV is a little bit of a lottery. I have worked with some excellent companies and technicians at hotels, and I have worked with some very disappointing technicians at hotels. So, knowing your AV partner and what they're capable of is really important. You can kind of, hopefully I've given you guys some clues, some breadcrumbs that you can sniff for. If they're like, oh yeah, we can stream it. Well, we've got a camera up in the loft and we just stream that wide shot of the room to Facebook. It's great. It's like, no, that's not your person. I know for a lot of big events, some of us are working with event planners. So, figure out where your partners are. But yes, microphones are a very big deal. And if you're, you don't want to just have a volunteer show up who says, I can stream for you, and they're in the back of the room with a phone, hopefully in a tripod, but they don't have any professional audio in. Like sometimes you can offend your audience by giving them something that's unwatchable or unhearable, inaudible. So be aware of how you can get audio from your AV team into your stream. It can be very simple adapters can do that so that you don't have to double mic everything, because it can be really annoying even for your speakers if they're going to use the podium mic, but you're like, oh, I have to put a lavalier on you also. Though, back to belt and suspenders, we'll often put a lav on someone and have a podium mic as a backup. But yeah, if you have questions around microphones, ask them. It's really, really valuable. Hey, we got a horror story. Hooray! By the way, Maggie, just before I go on to the horror story, have I addressed with enough specifics the mic issues?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Natalie attended a fully remote event that reached a cap of attendees and couldn't get in despite having a paid ticket. So yes, the summer of 2020 was very exciting. This, though, is something to be very aware of. I talked about the upgrades on Zoom. So Zoom Webinar is paid, but even if you pay for Zoom Webinar, there's a cap of 499 people. I think that includes panelists, unless you buy another upgrade. And Zoom meetings, they have something called large meeting, and you have to pay for that. Here's what's really, really, really important. If you do know pre-registration, if you're not sure how many people you might get, or if you have done pre-registration, and let's say, 2 days out, you're at 450 people, and you're like, oh, we're not going to get 500. I'm not worried about it. Buy it anyway, because once you hit start on Zoom, you cannot add the upgrade. Once that meeting is going, you can't alter that setting. And that is not something that you want to learn on event day and have someone like Natalie locked out of your event. It's very painful. So, and I saw that horror story once with a client who managed their Zoom and did not did not prepare. Anything else that we can talk about? Are there other aspects of deciding whether or not to be hybrid that I'm kind of curious to hear how everyone here is deciding whether or not they want to be only in person or hybrid, because I think that that's a really interesting decision that I know a lot of my clients have been going through right now. I know that one of my clients just did an in-person event because they partnered with the Eagles and they were given the football stadium as their event place. So I think they might have almost gone back to virtual or hybrid just for the fact that we're having such a huge spike right now. But they went forward, and apparently it worked out pretty well. Maggie, I think we might be able to end a little early and give people back some time if there's not more questions.
Yeah,
That's okay with you.
looks like the questions have stalled, but oh wait, there's one more here.
Yeah, I'm happy to wait a couple minutes, and I know I did blast through. I wanted to make sure I had Q&A time, and I left too much.
Yeah.
Um,
Question or comment
yeah.
from Mandy.
Plan to use that, yes. So, and I think that idea of bringing in those national speakers is something we're going to continue to see. There's one other aspect of this to be careful of. I know this happens a lot with high-end doctors and lawyers. If they're on your board, if you're running a legal advocacy organization or whatnot, be warned that you might get that high-end lawyer saying like, oh yeah, no, I'll definitely be at your event. And then 24 hours before the live event, they're like, you know what? I've got a meeting that'll just zoom me in. Just zoom me in. I do some work with some large health care organizations, and I cannot tell you how often with a couple hours before an event, luckily they were already hybrid, but someone would be like, just zoom me in. So if know your board, know your members, and be ready for that as a strong possibility, because I think a lot of people have gotten spoiled by that possibility. But yeah, I mean, I've seen national authors, like really well recognized people. I think in that demo reel, like we had, Patti LaBelle or Black Thought from the Roots, like these people participating from all over the place, all over the country, because it was easy. And it just changes the degree of the ask also. Like, if you've got a board member that's got a relationship with the booking manager for an artist, like suddenly getting them to participate in your event is much, much more attainable. So I really like to encourage people to think very, very big in the early stages of planning, and reach for the brass ring, see what you can get. But yeah, and remember, if you're going to bring them in like that, a big thing to do. It can be somewhat difficult if you're dealing with like Patti LaBelle, but whoever you're working with at that level, like they probably have assistants. Try to schedule a technical check, preferably not the day of, unless you're an evening event, but with enough lead time to help. I have had people on some pretty mediocre cameras or with some really bad microphones, even really wealthy people. So it is very advisable to make sure that stuff is tested. If you're using a higher end system like a vMix, vMix has something called vMix Call, which is really great. It is not Zoom. It gives us a lot more control. We can actually see their internet connectivity, but it's not Zoom. So people think they can log in at the last second, but you really want them checked in ahead of time and make sure that everything is working. Having conversations with panelists and attendees, hopefully we've all had this, but if you've got mediocre internet, like, can you please actually plug your laptop into your router as opposed to solely counting on Wi-Fi? Can you please ask the family not to all be streaming Netflix in different rooms while we're trying to have this big event where you're going to talk to 500 people? And again, even with national level talent, like reminding people of that can be really important. So that's a tip that didn't make the slides. So,
Great.
all right, everybody.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate your time today. And Michael did share his information. It'll be within the PowerPoint that he'll be sharing out with us. And as I said, this has been recorded so that we will have that available as well.
Pleasure to somewhat meet everybody. Have a
Yeah.
great afternoon.
Thanks so much, Michael. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Maggie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.